You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network. This is Talking Headways, a weekly podcast about sustainable transportation and urban design. I'm Jeff Wood. This week we chat with Melanie Piana, the Mayor of Ferndale, Michigan. We chat about her city's Woodward Avenue road diet, the city's bike plans, and how parking is part of too many urban issues. Stay with us. Today's podcast is brought to you by our wonderful, amazing Patreon supporters. Your support is critical to Talking Headways and Mondays at the Overhead Wire. We really appreciate it. To join this gang of zoning misfits and transportation rabble-rousers, go to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. $2 a month gets you some stickers and a handwritten note. $10 a month gets you one of our transportation scarves. Thanks so much to everybody who supports the show, from the bus drivers to the advocates all around the world. That's patreon.com/theoverheadwire. And for more information on our work and where to find our daily newsletter, the transportation scarves, our Cars Are Cholesterol merch, buy books from the authors that join us on the show at our bookshop affiliate site, or find our audiobook version of Raymond Unwin's Town Planning and Practice, check out the show notes on your podcatcher or visit theoverheadwire.com. Too many communities across the country do not have fair access to the resources and infrastructure they need to keep people healthy, especially in the context of climate change. The health impacts of climate change, such as respiratory illness and temperature-related deaths, are already being experienced, and while community leaders are working to build local solutions, they often don't have the support they need. The National Academy of Medicine's new Climate Communities Network was launched in response to this context. The Climate Communities Network will bring together local leaders from around the U.S. to work collaboratively to address the climate-related health challenges their communities face. Members are being recruited now to join the new nationwide initiative, which will help advance community-driven solutions to climate-related health inequities. Visit ccnmemberapplication.nam.edu to learn more and apply. That's ccnmemberapplication.nam.edu to apply by June 23, 2023. This message was brought to you by the National Academy of Medicine. Well, Mayor Melanie Piana, welcome to the Talking Headways podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk about all things mobility.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us. Before we get started, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I have been the mayor of the city of Ferndale for the last 4 years, and I was on city council for 10. So almost a total of 14 years of public service. And prior to being elected, I really am a nonprofit advocate, and I have been in nonprofit executive leadership for the last 20 years. And I left the automotive field in the early 2000s in the marketing web development space. I actually worked on the second generation of Chrysler, Dodge, and Jeep international websites. And I've left that field to go get my degree in urban planning. 6 months after I went into grad school at Wayne State University, I received an invitation to apply for the Michigan Suburbs Alliance, which was a startup nonprofit that was designed by city managers and mayors to help bridge the divide of the inner ring suburbs and the city of Detroit. At the time, Brookings Institute was doing a lot of research on inner ring suburbs, and Myron Orfield was also doing some studies on inner ring suburbs at the time, and that was sort of the impetus for helping create this nonprofit. And I jumped ship from the automotive field into urban planning while I was in urban planning school at Wayne. And that is where I really learned how local government works and doesn't work, the leadership of local officials, and really dove into the pressing issues of our region. And a lot of it is municipal finance reform, transportation, transit specifically in Southeast Michigan. And I just really loved working on these regional issues, and my career started growing. After 9 years, I left. I went to the Downtown Detroit Partnership, worked at one of the largest downtown organizations in the U.S., and also ended up in a Detroit neighborhood nonprofit, Jefferson East, as the chief operating officer, helping do equitable and inclusive development, redevelopment of a historically disinvested in community. And so really have a deep understanding of what residents want in Detroit, from listening to them and my role as an advocate on their behalf as a nonprofit and executive. And more recently was at the Detroit Regional Partnership working on the Build Back Better Regional Grant, which is the $52 million grant our region got to help shift our region from ICE to EV. But mostly I ride the bus, I ride my bike. I just bought an e-cargo bike. I commute from Ferndale to downtown Detroit for work. I commute by bus. I have an EV. We've been driving an EV Bolt for 4 years. So I really try to have the choices in my own household of getting around and really trying to understand connectivity in our communities, because that's what makes all of our neighborhoods and cities work, is connectivity to one another, connectivity to our downtowns and neighborhoods, and connectivity to other cities. And that is how people live their lives here. And I just try to represent that in my role as mayor in the city of Ferndale.
You mentioned the transition to thinking about city planning and getting away from your car company job before. I'm wondering if this was something that was already instilled in you when you were younger. Was cities something that you were interested in, or was it something that kind of triggered your transformation to thinking about cities more as these livable places without cars, or, living in an urban planning world where we talk about all the time, having different choices and all those different things?
Well, I grew up in a rural area and around cornfields, and it's not rural so much anymore due to suburban sprawl. My parents still live in my childhood home, and my first bus was the yellow bus to school. My first public bus, though, was in Tasmania, Australia. I was an exchange student when I was 14, and their public buses convert to school buses. And that's how I got to school for the year I was an exchange student in Tasmania in 1988, a long time ago. But I also lived in Sweden. I was an exchange student in Sweden for 3 months, and their daughter lived with my family my senior year in high school. I was a German major and lived in Munich and Munster. And Munster was the second largest bicycling community in the early 90s in Germany. And that is where I learned to live by bicycle, because that is all I had to get around. I would put my laundry bag on the back of my bike and head to the laundromat. And that is how I got around. So I really learned how to live differently with trains, buses, and bikes. And I think that is just when I finally saw urban planning, because I had never heard of urban planning in undergrad. When I finally learned about it, I decided that this was the right thing for me to do and shift. And boy, it was. It really changed my experience traveling to international cities, because I did all this international travel pretty young, but I didn't have the urban planning training. I just went there and partied and, transit and explored and was a young person just exploring the world. Whereas now I can't go to a city and not see their bollards and the way the street's designed and how people are interacting in a space, and just being an observer and wondering what is making the space work well and what could make the space work better. And that is sort of what the training I had over the last 20 years of my career that I parlay into my role as mayor.
I wish we had more educational opportunities to share with young people that urban planning is a profession. I had the same experience that you did. I went to school at the University of Texas at Austin, and I, got into geography, and that was like the field that I was interested in. And then sitting in class with a friend, he was like, "Well, do you want to keep doing this?" And I was like, "Well, yeah, that'd be cool." We have urban geography, but I was like, I don't really know about geology or those other things that we cover in part in the geography school. And he's like, "Well, there's this other thing in architecture called urban planning. You could do that and focus on cities." I was like, "What? You can do that?" And so I feel like a lot of my schoolmates at grad school at Texas and, people that I've met along the way, they met urban planning later on in life. And I think that that's something that is unique almost to the profession, because I feel like not a lot of people know, unless like their family members or parents or somebody else was involved in planning, they don't know that it exists until they see that, oh, there's college classes about this, or there's a grad program about planning. And so your experience kind of mimics mine in that way.
I had to do informational interviews. When I decided to go into urban planning, one of the impetuses was my best friend left this region to go to Chicago because she did not like to drive and she wanted to live a transit accessible lifestyle. And so I decided that I needed to figure out why, when I started realizing and putting the puzzle pieces together of why do I drive so much here in Southeast Michigan? Why is that my lifestyle choice? When I started to apply to grad school, I actually had to do informational interviews. And I sent out, emails to my closest friends. I'm like, "Do you know anybody in urban planning? Because I do not." And I need to talk to them to see if this is the right shift for me, a career shift. And obviously it was, and I got connected to some great people.
That's awesome. Well, now you're the mayor of Ferndale, Michigan. Can you tell us a little bit more about the city and a little bit more about how it's situated in the greater Detroit region?
We like to say we're fabulous Ferndale. It's been that way, a tag for a long time. Ferndale is 4 square miles. We're 20,000 people. Our median age is around 35. We are the largest LGBTQ community per capita in the state of Michigan. And we also have one of the largest LGBTQ community centers called Affirmations. We are, I would say, a strong activist community. We have a lot of great residents and business owners who get involved and contribute to the progress of our city. So much so, I've had other elected officials say it's great how easy it is to get people involved in your community. So I am thankful for our residents who have helped change the trajectory of Ferndale over the course of decades to be sort of a leader in a lot of progressive changes for communities, whether it's designing public space, mobility, or transportation. We really have tried to become a welcoming, inclusive community. And we always say, you belong here. And we really try to live those values as a city government.
What's the transportation landscape like?
Our region has multiple transit agencies. We have smart regional bus service, which serves the entire region, entire 3-county region, Macomb, Oakland, and Wayne County, and goes into Detroit. DDOT is Detroit Department of Transportation, and the city of Detroit is required to provide transit services in their city charter, which is why DDOT exists. We also have the Q line, which is the 6-mile streetcar. It's 3.3 miles one way, you add it up, so I guess it's 6.9 miles round trip. So we have lots of different transit systems, I would say, created at a time where demand for transit was needed, but the way we structured our transit systems here, I would say, has always been defined on, I would say, racism and who gets access to transit, who pays for it, and who doesn't. And I think over the years, and as demands have changed, some of these ways that these systems have been created are now some of the governance challenges facing the region in terms of providing more frequent and reliable service. We have underinvested, than any other region in our transit system. And we really just need to get people to work, into healthcare access, into school. And people have a really hard time doing that. And our system is really inequitable across the region. And I'm excited to be a part of change. I start my new job on Monday as the program director of the Regional Transit Authority of Southeast Michigan. So that's something I care deeply about, and we'll be diving more into the specifics of all of that.
Of course. And there's recently some funding measures passed as well.
Oakland County recently passed a millage that provided all communities in Oakland County to contribute to bus service. So there are multiple smaller transit agencies that are serving North Oakland County communities in the smaller communities that are underfunded as well. And this Oakland County All-In for Cities is a way to equalize funding for those communities. So I used to be the chair of the Oakland County Public Transit Authority, which was created in the 90s to represent the 13 communities that were opt-in. Only 13 communities out of the 62 communities of Oakland County for over 30 years were paying for regional bus service for SMART. And so the Oakland County millage was really ending that inequitable approach to paying for transit service. So while the 13 communities, we didn't pay more millage, we are status quo in what we're paying, as well as the service, but the county is expanding and connecting those other service providers to the broader regional transit picture. So it's a step forward of progress that I think will be good for Oakland County in expanding transit service.
Can you explain the millage to me? It's a term I hear when I look at, ballot measures across the country, but it's something that I'm not sure I quite understand. Is it a sales tax? Is it a property tax? Is it some sort of other?
The property tax. And the Oakland County Board of Commissioners are the governance body that approves to put it on the ballot.
Cool. Well, let's talk about the Woodward in the room. I want to talk about Woodward Avenue. It's a state highway. It bisects your city, and I imagine it has big impacts on how Ferndale and other cities along the way, and as well as Detroit, do things because it's such a kind of a main artery for the region.
Yeah, Woodward is the spine of the region. It is 26 miles from downtown Detroit to downtown Pontiac. I believe it spans 13 communities. Ferndale is at sort of like the apex of it at 8 Mile and Woodward, which is the north border of the city of Detroit. And as you said, it is 8 lanes of highway that bisects not only downtown Ferndale, but downtown Birmingham. And really, 4 decisions made decades ago about the city of Pontiac. They created a loop around downtown Pontiac on Woodward that bypassed the downtown. And fortunately, the city of Pontiac will be removing the loop in 2025 and putting back together more of a connected street grid that supports connecting people into their downtown from all of their streets and not this just big grand loop around.
So Woodward bisects the city, and you said it's 8 lanes wide?
It is 8 lanes wide. That is the typical MDOT state highway. We are also bisected by 8 Mile, which is also 8 lanes. So that is the south border of Ferndale at the Detroit north end. So we have 16 lanes of highway that really define our community. Woodward cutting through the heart of our downtown, and then 8 Mile defining our southern border. And it's intensive to have 16 lanes of highway in your community. But the number one barrier and safety concern with our residents and business owners is crossing Woodward at our heart of our downtown at 9 Mile and Woodward. Woodward was the first paved road in the United States, not in Ferndale, but 2 miles up in Detroit at 7 Mile. So we really are here talking about innovation in pavement and innovation in road design. And where we are now in the city of Ferndale is helping to evolve it, to modernize Woodward, to better serve the residents. It has a long history. We want to acknowledge the history, but the design of Woodward is no longer providing the types of needs that the community and residents want, particularly crossing 9 and Woodward. The pedestrian traffic lights are too short. I call it the Woodward run. There's 5 to 8 seconds at the end of the countdown where you can literally see most people pick up their gait and or run to finish crossing 9 and Woodward in 1 traffic light. We also have only 5 major crossings, so the crosswalks are a half mile spaced apart. And when you're in a walkable community, that is really not enough crosswalks, but that is going to be for future planning under reconstruction. Right now, we have orange barrels on Woodward because we created a project called Woodward Moves, and it has aligned with MDOT's repaving schedule. We started in 2018. It took 4 years to get the safety improvements added on to the repaving schedule with the support of an MDOT grant, as well as a Transportation Alternatives Program grant through SEMCOG, which is the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments. So working with my stellar urban planning staff and my city manager and the city manager with support of the city council in Pleasant Ridge, 2 cities went in to apply for these grants to put safety improvements on Woodward. What we're getting is better crosswalks, better bus bump outs. We are getting a lane reduction, retaking one of the curb lanes and putting in protected bike lanes with parking. So there's going to be curb, bike lane, delineators, and then parking, and then a travel lane on each side. So, and it's going to be a two-way cycle track because the 8 lanes are one way, 4 lanes north and 4 lanes south. So we are going to be also having our first bike traffic light at 9 Woodward as well.
That's really awesome. And I want to talk about kind of the process of getting to the point where you're at now, where you have this amazing kind of cross section of a street and then you implement a road diet. Ferndale, it seems like, from my understanding at least, has always been thinking about road diets and how you can kind of improve the streets, at least for the last 10, 20 years or so. And so I'm wondering what the inflection point is at which you talk to MDOT about actually making a change to a state highway like that.
First, I want to say, how did we know we had the support from residents and business owners in 2018 to even ask MDOT for delaying their road project, their repaving project? They wanted to repave in 2020. And thank God they didn't, because that was the year of the pandemic. And I can't imagine a complete repaving during shutdown. So I think we dodged something even more critical by asking them to delay the repaving. But what we have done with the communities along Woodward, at least from Ferndale to Pontiac in Oakland County, 2013 and 14, I helped create a Woodward task force of elected officials where we started working together to say, how can we advance some of our common shared goals? It led to a complete streets plan for all of Woodward from Detroit to Pontiac. It was adopted in 2014. And then we received a Federal Transportation Administration grant for an alternatives analysis of $2.5 million that unfortunately did not get invested in after the 2016 regional transit ballot went down by 1%. Those two projects required intensive public engagement. And we also updated our master plan twice in this 10-year period. We also had 2 versions of our non-motorized plan, started one in 2012, 13, and then updated again in 2018. We also did a bike and pedestrian safety audit in 2019. So we had ample evidence that the concerns that we've heard from our residents and business owners was going to be supporting a request from MDOT or to MDOT to delay paving and then work with us to apply for grants. SEMCOG, the staff there, were instrumental in helping guide us through MDOT's required road diet checklist, which is a pretty lengthy process that they require cities to show that the delay in traffic flow won't be intense and create more backup and congestion on Woodward. Cities are required to pay for those studies independently to show that you are going to meet the requirements of MDOT. So while it's an intensive process, MDOT has been supportive in changing what they typically would say no to. And I think Ferndale is a pilot city in many respects on how to do this differently. And we have other cities now along the Woodward corridor looking at doing the same, going through the road diet checklist, which is a specific requirement by MDOT.
How important is it to get those policy goals aligned with the budget priorities and timelines? Because you said that MDOT requires the cities to pay for, any improvements that you make outside of a regular repaving. So I'm wondering, how...
Well, hang on. They make you pay for the studies to prove that you can do a road diet as part of the checklist. So the consultants, the traffic studies, those are the expenses where the city has to take on through their process. And then once you do and they say, okay, then you apply for the grant funding and go through that process. So this process from asking them to delay to actual barrels on the ground was 2018 to October of last year. There's 2 phases of paving. So it took a long time.
The traffic on the street, I think I read formerly around 100,000 cars a day, and now it's maybe around 40,000. Is that the correct numbers?
42,000, yeah. Really excess capacity.
So that makes it easier to, kind of sell the road diet as an optimal solution for the city.
Correct. We also have a term, we don't call it a road diet, we call it a lifestyle change. That's part of our messaging. Who wants to be on a road diet, Jeff? Who wants to be on a diet? No one. So We really say this is a lifestyle change because this is something we've been doing on all of our major corridors in the city of putting the bike lanes in. And the investment that we're getting from it, from private investment, we have business owners, particularly Ferndale Project Brewery, they moved here and set up shop as a brewery because of the bike lanes on Livernois and connectivity to Detroit, which also has beautiful protected bike lanes on the other side of 8 Mile on Livernois. So we really have tried to make better connectivity to our neighbor in the South, Detroit, and it's being noticed by entrepreneurs and seeing that as an investment opportunity to support their business long term.
Tell me more about the bike infrastructure in the city, because I understand that, folks even move to Ferndale because of the walkability and the bikeability of the place and the ability to get around without a car. You hear that from folks who are wanting to find a place to live in the region, and they're like, oh, I want to pick that place because that has all the things that I want.
Oddly enough, the city manager in the early 2000s, the former city manager, put down a white stripe and called it a bike lane. And it was the first white stripe bike lane in the region. And it caused a lot of consternation and news saying, what is Ferndale doing? But it was the courageous move at the time where there was no complete streets ordinances in place. And that is where I think the innovation that the local government was supporting, because having a city council support a city manager who does that means a policy change just by putting a white stripe paint down. So that is really in the early 2000s is where I came into the scene. In 2009, I got elected and really started saying, okay, if this council had the courage to do that, then me as a council person, I need to elevate their legacy and do and build on what they started. And that is kind of how I've seen my role on city council. From what I inherited from the leaders before. In 2012, when my second year in, I led a complete streets ordinance in the city. I had some help from my planning commission members and really helped get that over the finish line. And that's when we started changing the culture in the Department of Public Works, which if you don't have your Department of Public Works on board with complete streets infrastructure, then it's really hard to pair up the planning of actually implementation. Over the years, I've been so impressed with our city staff because they have created this, what I call grant writing machine of doing the policy and plans and taking what's in the master plan and the non-motorized plan and using these complete streets and leveraging that and saying, these are policy decisions that council has supported. Let's find out, how do we bring more grant money to offset the implementation of these investments on safer street infrastructure? And so that is really how we've been able to make it work, because the city of Ferndale, we're a small city. Michigan disinvests in local government through revenue sharing and doesn't pay enough. And so small cities are always looking at to offset installing and implementing safer infrastructure. We could never do these bike lanes on our own. Almost every bike lane in the city, protected bike lane in the city of Ferndale, has been offset by grant funding.
Streets are more than just transportation, obviously. They're where runoff is collected. They interface with the surrounding environment. They're conduits for sewer pipes and rights of way for power and those types of things. How do you think we should be looking at streets, given all of, the improvements that you all have made in Ferndale over the many years?
Well, I always think of streets as the skeleton of, a living community. You need to take care of the exoskeleton. And that is what is underneath your streets. That is what your streets are. And if they aren't unhealthy, then it will reflect into your community about how people are interacting with each other because of the type of access they have to get around and how comfortable they feel using that infrastructure to get around. We have lead pipes here. We are actively trying to change them over. We're an older community, so we understand the health implications about lead service lines. So we are paying attention and contributing more than we need to by state mandates to change over our lead lines sooner than the deadline that the state has provided. So we're doing lead lines, we're doing stormwater infrastructure, planting more trees, which is something that we desperately need on Woodward. As an example, Woodward median is very large, and we've done a tree inventory, and 76% of our trees on Woodward are in the median. And the median cannot be used by people. MDOT won't allow people, it's not a park, it's just a median to get across the road. But that is where they have invested money, MDOT has, to beautify an 8-lane corridor, when only 26% of the trees are on the sidewalks. And the sidewalks are so narrow that we can't put in tree wells to actually do more tree infrastructure that would beautify the experience of actually walking on the sidewalks. And trees increase the amount of revenue businesses can get. So when you look long-term at reconstruction of Woodward, the goal is wider sidewalks, but that is probably a decade away, but planting the seeds now. So when you look at holistically of your infrastructure, getting back to your question, you got to pay attention to all of it. It all matters. I also see big changes in EV infrastructure. We're one of the few cities in South Oakland County that actually have an EV ordinance to help take advantage of all the EV money coming out of the state, as well as the Inflation Reduction Act. Ferndale is about to put in 10 more in partnership with a dealership in GM, who it's a rebate program, and we're going to start putting more EV charging stations in our library, public parking lot, and one of our other main parking lots downtown. And we built a parking structure, unfortunately, during the pandemic, but we have 6 new charging stations there as well. Our residents are very climate focused. I helped set a carbon neutrality goal when I became mayor and became part of Climate Mayors and ICLEI's Race to Zero. We have many people here who are driving EVs and plan to switch. And so when you look at mobility, when you look at transportation, it's not only bike lanes, but it's also planning for the transition to EV infrastructure. We also have regional bike share through MoGo Detroit. We are connected now to the city of Detroit and 4 other cities through this regional bike share system. So EV infrastructure, regional bike share. I see more people riding e-cargo bikes and e-bikes in Ferndale, and our bike racks are now too small to handle some of these new, larger bikes. We also have curb management changes. We have a lot of drop-offs, pickups with our restaurant and bar service. So when you look at the whole picture in totality, we have changing needs, we have changing technology, and I foresee that is going to be more pressure on the infrastructure that we have longer term. I have e-scooter companies who want to come in, and I've said, wait until we're done with the Woodward project, because nobody wants to deal with orange barrels and scooters on sidewalks that are too small to handle that type of scooter population. So the demands are increasing of being a little bit more agile with how you're dealing with mobility, and it all comes back to infrastructure.
It also kind of points to some coordination issues, because you are a small town, you're doing all these things, but you have the towns around you. And I'm curious, how that works out, where you're building a bike lane, and does it end at the end of the city, where the city ends? Or, you have a wonderful new bike room that you've created where people can get to downtown. But if people want to come from outside the city, do they have to kind of navigate harsher streets to get to the beautiful streets of Ferndale?
I am so grateful that Ferndale is part of a multi-jurisdictional collaboration of cities. We got a Safe Streets for All grant, the planning grant, between 9 cities in South Oakland County, from Ferndale, Hazel Park, Madison Heights, Oak Park, up to Berkeley. We are really looking at how do we need to change our complete streets policies, but also how do we better align our connection points on safe street infrastructure investment. We are going through that grant planning process now. So I will have more information later about how we're going to do that. The important point is that these cities recognize we need to do more together. And that is the goal of improving safety across jurisdictional lines, because people commute People travel, they visit, and they don't care about the jurisdictional lines. They just care about getting safely to their destination. And that is where I go back to creating safe connections between communities is really important. We also have another grant coming for planning for a 9 mile from Hazel Park to Southfield. So going east to west through another set of, I think, 5 communities to look at how do we create 9 mile more of the greenway connecting us east to west. So that is underway as well. So lots of different planning efforts, hopefully positioning us to go after Safe Streets for All phase 2 of implementation funds as a collaborative group of cities.
You mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act, but then there's also the infrastructure bill, the IIJA, as I guess the acronym goes. But how much do you think that the infrastructure bill will change how cities like yours kind of apply for federal money or get access to funding that can actually help you do all the things that you're trying to do in the city, but also with your partners in surrounding cities?
One of my highlights leading up to the passing of the IIJA bill was presenting to Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg through the National League of Cities. For the last 4 years, I've been on the Transportation Infrastructure Service Committee representing Ferndale, promoting Infrastructure Week. Unfortunately, we had one successful one where it led to an actual passing of a bill.
The joke, yeah.
Yeah, the importance of that bill and the investment really opened up for small cities is the transportation block grant funding, which provided more flexibility for small cities to apply directly for these funds and not having it redistributed through the state. So many cities through this process, through the National League of Cities, said, hey, we want to make it easier to access funds and not have, the state being a gatekeeper. Where I see the policy changes more progressive in the communities looking to do complete streets and improve safety, reduce crashes and death, taking on the safe systems approach, which the state of Michigan has too, but I think the cities did it earlier than them. And so really what I think you see is a federal policy reaffirming what these cities have been asking for all along and more flexibility in how they can design for safety. Whereas there was a lot of engineering restrictions of you couldn't do those things because you would restrict the level of service for car travel. And the idea now is shifting and allowing for more flexibility and multimodal planning so that biking transit and other ways of getting around are included in the assessment and evaluation for street redesign.
In your time as a planner and a public servant, is there anything that you've been surprised about during your process to get things done?
I have always been surprised by the emotional tie to parking. Through all of this, the fundamental engagement and outreach is about parking. Whether you're trying to do affordable housing or Woodward is losing 65 to 70 parking spaces on street parking because there is a driver safety problem coming out of the side streets because Woodward is at a 30-degree angle. And when you inch out, you have to inch out and sit as a driver in the crosswalk on the side street. But when you inch out, you can't see past the first parked car. So it really is a sightline visibility issue. So having those conversations about if we want improved safety, we need to have trade-offs with parking. And fortunately, our residents are saying safety is important, and our business owners, some of our business owners are skeptical, and that's okay. That's part of the process. And we will make adjustments where we need to. But I think parking has probably been the hardest topic. I didn't know I would need to become really adept at understanding the implications of parking, the cost of parking on new housing projects, and taking residents and business owners through those conversations and process and education and learning. It really is intensive. And I see it happen at every community along the Woodward corridor.
Do you have any words of advice for folks who might be interested in running for office for their first time or thinking about even going to planning school?
It was not in my cards to run for city council. I was in urban planning school. I moved to Ferndale pretty much the same weekend I started going to school. And I immediately signed up to be a volunteer on our Downtown Development Authority because I wanted to become a better urban planner. I decided that I needed to learn how the city functioned from the downtown standpoint. And I did that for 5 years. And I got appointed by the former mayor to the Zoning Board of Appeals. So I understood that process. So as a volunteer on 2 things in the city for 5 years, I was finally asked to run, and I was skeptical. But I'm so glad I did it because it has been the most wonderful thing that I've ever done. And I now encourage more professionals, economic development, urban planners, designers, or architects to run for local office. We really do need change agents with that type of perspective on city councils everywhere. I inherited my spot. There was another urban planner from Wayne State onto city council who recruited me. So you just never know what will happen. And, keep your possibilities open about running for council, and volunteer and understand and build relationships in your community.
So your term is up. Are you finished with elected office?
Yes, I am retiring after 14 years at the end of the year. It's time to pass the baton to other leaders, new leaders in the community. And I'm excited to move on to my new job at the RTA and walk away with some proud accomplishments on city council and as mayor in the city of Ferndale. It's visible. I can see them, and I'm pretty proud of them.
Yeah, I would be too. It's pretty amazing accomplishments. Well, where can folks find you or find out more information about Ferndale if they wish to learn more?
To learn more about Woodward Moves, go to woodwardmoves.com and you can Google Ferndale or plug in ferndalemi.gov. Be careful you don't go to Ferndale, Washington or Ferndale, California, because I get mixed up with those mayors as well. They're doing great things there too. I stay on top of the other Ferndale. But you can go to Twitter. I'm Mel Piana on Twitter. I'm also the mayor, Melanie Piana, on TikTok. I teach about local government and have fun on TikTok. And I'm also on LinkedIn at Melanie Piana.
Awesome. Well, Mayor Melanie Piana, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Jeff, for having me. I love Street Slog.
And thanks for joining us. The Talking Headways podcast is a project of The Overhead Wire and published first at Streetsblog USA. Thanks to our wonderful Patreon supporters for sponsoring this week's show and Mondays at The Overhead Wire. Find us at patreon.com/theoverheadwire. And you can sign up for our 16-year-old newsletter at theoverheadwire.com. And you can also listen to our show on your podcatcher of choice, including Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts. And if you can't find it there, you can always find its original home at usa.streetsblog.org. We'll see you next time at Talking Headways.